Hello and welcome to the very first episode of the Happier Life Project 2025, brought to you by the free award-winning mental health and wellness app, My Possible Self. I'm your host, Gabby Sanderson, and today we're diving into a topic that resonates with so many of us: how to navigate high-functioning anxiety, shake off some of the pressures of this flipping hustle culture, and start the year with small, meaningful, and achievable goals that set us up for real success, reclaiming our time, energy, and peace of mind. Today, we're joined by the wonderful Dr. Kelly Vincent, a licensed clinical psychologist who's very passionate about helping her clients, who are, sorry fellas, mainly women, overcome anxiety, trauma, and burnout. Dr. Kelly combines a holistic approach with evidence-based treatments to empower her clients to heal and thrive. And she's here to help us unpack the complexities of high-functioning anxiety, what it looks like, how it impacts our lives, why so many of us accept it as, well, life, and most importantly, how we might begin to manage it more effectively. If you're listening to this episode during January, when it goes to broadcast, many of you are considering how you want this new year to map out. We're going to look at that, and we're going to explore how and why we might unsubscribe from the pressures of hustle culture. And what exactly is hustle culture? That relentless push to always be doing more, achieving more, buying more. And instead, let's think about what we truly want to subscribe to in 2025. What values, habits, and goals will bring us closer to a more balanced and fulfilling and happier life? This episode is all about starting the new year on the right foot, with small, meaningful, and achievable steps towards success. So whether you're looking to break free from the grind or simply want to approach the year with more mindfulness and intention, Dr. Kelly's insights will inspire and guide you. So grab a cuppa, find a nice cozy spot, and let's begin this journey together. Ready to find a healthier, happier, and more mindful 2025? Let's get started. Welcome, Dr. Kelly Vincent, to the Happier Life Project podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming on to the pod, and I suppose setting us up on the right foot for the new year. Now, as we're recording, it's 2024, but when this goes out, it will be early 2025. And we know that January is not the most cheerful month. Usually it's like the aftermath of, if we include Thanksgiving, November, December, it's all about celebration. It's all about indulgence, perhaps spending too much on presents. And then January comes and it's dark and it's cold and it's very I think it's quite jarring. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it can be for sure. It depends on where you live in the world, right? So I feel very grateful for living in San Diego. So the physical atmosphere can be uplifting mood wise, sunshine and things like that versus being covered in snow. But yes, I think it's a bit of a harsh context switch between kind of the holidays and leaning in. And if you have a lot of family around, or if you're really social, and if you do connect with, the holidays in a way where it's joyful and celebratory and fun, and you normally are kind of leaning into being present and whatnot. And then January comes around and it's all done. It's all over. It's kind of back to the grind. And then there's that pressure of new year, new me kind of vibes to make resolution and make the year the best it's ever been and all the things. So yeah, it can be a bit jarring. And also the holidays for some people don't feel that way. There's a lot of things that can come up for people around the holidays as it relates to grief and loss and disappointment and things like that. So that can even be jarring too, of like, okay, now let's just like move on with life, right? So I
So
think it can
true.
go both ways. Yeah, it can be hard in different ways for different people for different reasons.
Yeah, absolutely. What are your thoughts then on this whole new year, new me, new you?
It was funny because I was literally just talking to my client just previously to jumping on here about that. And I mean, the new year, new me, like I said a second ago, so much pressure, so much pressure to kind of figure out what that even means, to figure out how to implement it. And usually we're, kind of trying to dabble into a bunch of different new habits and patterns and behaviors, which can be very overwhelming to the system, very overwhelming to our routines and all the things. So my outlook on it is yes, you can make resolutions and intentions in January if that serves you, if that helps serve as like, an annual reset. And you don't have to. It can happen in February, it can happen in March. And I think what we have to think about is what capacity we have, right? What's going on in our lives to be able to invite in newness, because new is hard. It's hard for the brain, right? The brain doesn't really like the unfamiliar. It likes the familiar and cozy. And so doing something new, like a new workout class 5 days a week or whatever it may be, is going to be a little bit jarring to the system. And so it needs to kind of be a little bit more easeful and a little bit more intentional. So my thoughts on it is that if it's bringing pressure and stress, it's probably
Yeah.
not helping. It's probably not going to be ideal, and it's probably not going to be sustainable. So I'm always a proponent of small little bite-sized pieces that you could chew off and kind of build on and kind of habit stack, as you go. And if it doesn't make sense to kind of do a lot of that recalibration work in January, then don't do it, right? Like what if you just went through something really intense, or there's a health issue or something like that? You're not going to have the capacity to know what would be the most helpful because you're in survival mode. So I think it's also about checking in with yourself of where you're at right now in life and what would be most supportive of your entire system. And especially like when I say system, I'm thinking of like the nervous system and also just systems outside of you, and all that is super important to consider. Because it's not always easy just to kind of go in goal setting mode and
Right.
then run with those.
Right. And set yourself up to fail as well. And we know this statistically from how many people join a gym in January. And I think it's 2 or 3 months and then numbers peter off quite considerably. What are some of if we're going to take the opportunity though for that kind of reflection and maybe trying to work on some of the bad habits, shall we say, and prioritizing our mental health more. And I think this sort of weaves into the kind of work that you do with your clients. What would you suggest would be some of the areas that we should look at for maybe setting ourselves up for success, if you will, for 2025?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, of course, like, the answer that's kind of a little bit of an eye roll is it depends, right? Obviously, it depends on the person and their situation and their lived experience, right? So if someone, I'm talking to someone that has always struggled with anxiety, I might encourage and collaborate with them to create newer habits and engaging in the world and engaging with themselves in a way then that would be different than with depression, right? And I work from a very kind of mind-body lens and more specifically a nervous system informed lens. So someone with, say, anxiety, they're kind of living in that very activated fight flight state, right? There's a lot of heightened energy, a lot of mobilization energy. It's that sympathetic part of our nervous system. So
Right.
what they need actually is slowing down, is taking a pause, taking a minute, being more intentional, being more mindful, so that you could create so many little bite-sized intentions and goals out of just that, versus someone who's struggling with depression is more in that hypo-aroused state, more in that kind of freeze state, very low, flat, a struggle to do things, lack of motivation. So they need to kind of get going, right? They need sort of upregulation is what we would say. So their sort of plan of what the new year could look like is going to be very different. It's more going to be like focused on behavioral activation, getting them to slowly build habits and behaviors that they're building momentum, right? So it really kind of depends on who you are and how you move through the world. And then also like what your intentions are. What is it that you want for yourself, or what is it that you want to feel, or what do you want to embody? I always, encourage clients to, if that's hard to like visualize because they just have never been there or it seems so far away, then I ask them to kind of, well, who's someone you really admire? Who is someone that you see moves through the world in the way that you would want to move through the world? So for instance, like, I'm thinking someone that I know that is really like grounded. She's really attuned. She's really values led. Is she perfect? No, but she moves through the world in a way that has a lot of intentionality and mindfulness. And so for me, that'd be like, oh, I'd love to embody that more. So then you kind of reverse engineer it and be like, all right, well, what are the small little steps that I could take to get to a place where I feel that way? I feel more grounded, more aligned, more value led. And one of those steps could be, for example, knowing what your values are. Like, what is it that you value and why do you value that? And then those values can serve as sort of action items. So if I value connection and grounded, safe, stabilized connection, then it might be where my habit or my behavior that I'm working on is connecting with people that make me feel that way, or spending more time with those types of people. So I think it totally depends. And you have to ask yourself kind of those bigger questions and then kind of narrow it down. So it's like, what are those intentions? What is it that you're trying to kind of get after? What are you trying to embody and feel? And then you can kind of create little habits and actions and behaviors based off of that. At least that'd be my way of approaching it.
Well, and certainly we know from our database and when we've done polls and stuff that anxiety and depression, I think it's not a surprise. They are the two big areas that a lot of people that listen to the pod and use the app do struggle with. So that was a really useful answer. Thank you. I did want to ask you about working with quite a lot of your clients, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, have high functioning anxiety. So this is this kind of like hamster wheel, right? But I wonder, is that more something going on internally or externally, or it's triggered externally so it becomes internal? Because again, I feel like that is something that is just so ingrained in culture.
Oh gosh, totally. It's both, honestly. And just to kind of clarify, high functioning anxiety isn't a clinical diagnosis. At least, in the US, we use the DSM, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual. Essentially, it's a book of all the disorders. Right. And high functioning anxiety is in there. Essentially, high functioning anxiety is a way to describe someone who actually really is struggling with anxiety, but yet is functioning according to society standards quite well, and they're achieving, right? So it's kind of that person that seems really ambitious and really organized and a go-getter, successful. They can also be kind of pleasers, and but yet internally they're kind of constantly managing this hum that sometimes gets really, really loud and really overwhelming, both physically and mentally, of that anxious part of us, right? And so yes, you're functioning again, according to the outside world, but yet internally you're feeling anything but that, and you're just kind of surviving it. Yeah. And yes, a lot of my work, I kind of go into that. Also, I kind of feel like it's become a specialty area because of my own lived experience, right? My own experience moving through the world, and yes, society's hustle culture and, boss babe, hashtag boss babe, right? Like all of this societal pressure to kind of do all the things. Also, I think as women who also have many other roles like motherhood and, friendships and being an owner of a business or whatever it may be, we kind of get sold this idea that we can do it all. Yeah. And that we can kind of do it all perfectly if we just do more and we work harder and we keep showing up, right? But obviously we all know eventually that's not sustainable. So so high functioning anxiety, I think so much of it is about understanding your specific experience of it, what's gone into it, right? So all the underbelly of some of your childhood stuff and your adolescent stuff in your early 20s, like what those beliefs we sort of formed and got fed or got told, or wounding or traumas that had happened, developmentally, kind of can go into this concept of how we are supposed to show up in the world. So we have to like understand all of that. And then the nervous system stuff is huge because oftentimes people with high functioning anxiety, they're living in that hyper aroused state. They're living in that overactivation where slowing down is threatening. Slowing down is uncomfortable. It makes us feel unproductive, all of the things. So we have to understand too, just the way our nervous system is habituated, which oftentimes that habituation happened way long ago. And we're just kind of building off that habituation over time and continuing to kind of strengthen those neural pathways to move through the world in the ways that we do. So it's about a lot of unwinding and understanding your specific experience and then working on engaging with yourself and the world in a different way, right? So the last, I don't know, probably 5-6 years of even my life, it's like, what does it even mean to be mindful? Like, what does it even mean to just be? What does it mean to let go, to accept, right? All of those things that I never got taught. I've been learning and will continue to learn for probably the rest of my life of what that means for me and how it feels good in my body and, in my space. So it's probably a little bit of a long-winded answer, but I could go on for days about high functioning anxiety, but it's definitely a thing, definitely an experience. A lot of people, and really it's just, they're not meeting formal diagnostic criteria for like generalized anxiety or panic disorder. So it's like they're kind of going under the radar, but they're still struggling. They're still having a hard time to kind of manage and not burn out and all of those different things. So you still need support.
Well, I mean, I don't want to make this about me, but I can so relate to everything you're saying as well. And I'm sure
a lot of women can.
Yeah, that was what I was going to say too. I'm sure a lot of people, they feel like you're speaking directly to them. I don't know what the answer is because, and maybe this is just speaking a bit from personal experience, but I think this does apply to a lot of women too, where you can appear so confident and like you've got everything together and, you can quite easily go into a room and do a presentation and do all the things and you look like you've got it all, even though you're very, very busy. But then, and again, maybe this is more women than men, I want to be a bit careful, but like advocating for yourself and also like if you have bitten off more than you can chew, maybe voicing that rather than trying to cope. And I feel like this is still such a big issue where it's like, I don't know, maybe it's we don't want to be seen as dropping the ball. There's some pride in there, or maybe we don't want to hurt feelings, or maybe it's to do with work as well, because especially if you are in more of a corporate field, I think the pressure there is very high and it's expected to work a lot of hours.
Yep. All of that. And usually the work with my clients, like, and even my own work, like I'm trying to get at like that underlining belief system, right? So for me, it has been more about enoughness, right? And that kind of formed in childhood for different reasons, based on my attachment with my parents, based on the education environment that I was in, like a lot of different reasons as to this belief of like, oh, I'm not enough, but I'll be enough when I do this, I do that, I do this, right? Or I received love by being praised or acknowledged, right? And so that's like self-reinforcing. It's not really self-reinforcing. It's really external reinforcement, but then you self-reinforce of like, oh, like this feels good. I want more of that. So it kind of just depends on like what is underneath to kind of be driving that. And not to say that it's a bad thing, right? Like I feel very grateful and thankful for that way of being, because it did help me achieve my doctorate and it helped me achieve building my practice. And it does serve us, right? It very much helps us get shit done and go after our goals and our ambitions. So it can be a really beautiful part of us. It's just, we have to be able to be aware of it to understand when it's kind of getting a little bit too ahead of itself, when it's driving the ship in more of like a maladaptive way because of that belief system potentially that's underneath it. So again, it's not like a good or bad. It's more just what I would encourage is, if you do resonate with this, is to be more mindful of what is actually happening and why, or be more intentional of why you're doing something, or why you're committing to something, or why you're not saying no, or why you're not taking a break, right? And this is just a little tidbit just to give a little bit of like color to what I'm explaining. But for instance, I remember like, it was probably like 3 years ago. So I have a professional Instagram that turned into a thing. It turned into part of my business and a thing that I didn't really anticipate. And I remember like when I was in like the crux of achieving and building and doing the things like that high functioning anxiety part of me, I remember thinking like, I gotta like kind of let go of this. I gotta let go of posting as many times as I am and caring about if things do well or whatever it may be. And there was so much pressure and stress around this thing. And I had to realize that underneath it, it was a belief. It was like, if I let this thing go, I won't be as successful, or I won't achieve my goals in the same way, or this is the key to getting to this specific thing that I want for myself, right? So it's like, that's what I mean by kind of taking a pause, taking a step back and trying to understand the root of the behavior. What's kind of driving the behavior and what are we trying to, what need are we trying to fulfill? And it's not always like because it's I'm not enough or I'm not, whatever. It doesn't always have to be that, but it tends to often have something under there that is, because if you didn't have something like that driving, you would then take a break and be proud of yourself, or just be like, yeah, this is what I have to do. Like, of course I'm going to have to rest. Like, I'm good, but normally there's like anxiety around that, to rest and to pull back and to not continue to function in the way that you are, because there's some assumption there, if that all makes sense.
It totally makes sense. What happens then if it's more of a financial reason for going, working crazy? Maybe you're the breadwinner in the family and you've got kiddos to feed, or maybe you're just, like being a single person and having to still pay for your own apartment and whatever is a lot. So especially like, in the UK, definitely we've got a major cost of living crisis, and a lot of US too. Yeah. So then like it becomes a little bit more challenging then, doesn't it? Because there's a genuine fear.
Yeah. And if we think about it, those are needs, right? So you're bumping up against basic needs of shelter, basic needs of food, of, those kinds of things. And so yeah, that could be what's underneath it, is that there's a fear and anxiety about not providing in the ways that you need to provide for yourself and for your family. And that it makes total sense, right? And it makes sense why the behavior you're engaging in the world in the way that you are, is because it's a bit of like survival mode in a way. Yeah. And that is definitely like a different flavor than more of like a psychological need to be enough, or to be lovable, or to be, whatever, likable, all the different things. Yeah. I would probably look at those a little bit different. If it was a client coming in with these basic core needs that are creating a lot of anxiety, then we might more work towards, looking at the bigger picture of like, what intentional decisions can we make to where you still can survive and get your basic needs met without running yourself into the ground. But then again, there are times in our life where we do have to show up that way, which is what I mean by like that high functioning anxiety experience sometimes is very helpful and can really get us from point A to point Z or whatever. So it's not necessarily bad, but it's just not sustainable. Right. Yeah. It's just not a sustainable way of living. And that's where we just, again, have to be a little bit more aware of where we're at, what capacity we have, what we're needing, and what's underneath it. Right. Like, what is that driving force? What are those needs that we're trying to meet?
Well, I think as well, unsubscribing from hustle culture is very tricky, because it's so easy to get sucked into all the messages that we do need this outfit and this car and this particular house. And like, maybe we don't need quite as much as we think we need, but we're constantly being brainwashed really without even noticing, because of, just take an Instagram feed, for example.
Agreed. And that's where, like, I think that's where, when I talk about like values and when I talk about intentionality and the pause of just noticing what you're consuming, what you're being fed, and that has to be looked at, right? Like how much time you're spending on social media where you're getting those images and you're getting sort of, you don't have this kind of kitchen and you don't have that kind of decoration for the holiday, whatever it is. Yeah. Like, we have to ask ourselves, is this serving me? Like, is it serving me to be sitting here scrolling and taking in all this data that's creating belief systems that, yeah, my house isn't pretty enough, or my kids' clothes aren't trendy enough, or mine, right? So that can be a choice, right? That can be a choice of what you're going to expose and consume. And I think we have to sometimes make those hard decisions, even though it's very normalized in our culture and continuing to be normalized. we still don't have to subscribe to that, right?
Yeah.
We can still, the experience of, or the skill of being present, I think is something that like so many of us have lost touch with because of the world that we live in, but it's a skill that we can lean into and continue to lean into over time. And something like that, less social media scrolling would be a great one to lean into.
Yeah.
A lot of reasons.
Yeah, I've said this before on the podcast, not for a long time, but when this goes out, will it be 2 years or 3 years? Either 2 or 3 years since I went to India for 9 weeks. And especially when I was doing my yoga teacher training for a month, I was living in very, very modest accommodation in the foothills of the Himalayas. And I didn't even, and this was in January, so it was absolutely freezing. We didn't have hot water or a heater or anything. So I was literally going to bed wearing like 4 sweaters and 2 coats. And that's not an exaggeration. Didn't have internet, but there was like monkeys swinging off the trees and just like wild dogs and cows milling around. And it was the most content I've ever been in my life, honestly. I would have just stayed there forever if given the chance. But it was like everything that the Western world is at our fingertips, let's put it that way. It was all removed. And then it was like, I feel so at peace, I was like, this is what it's like.
Totally. And I think we have to remember like when it comes to coping skills and all the things that are out there, all the gadgets and the services and all the things, like sometimes it's the most basic things like nature, like technology-free time, right? Some of the most basic stuff can be so replenishing and so nourishing and so helpful to our nervous system. Because if you think about it, when we're in this like buzz of a world, our nervous system is reacting to everything around us, right? And also reacting to everything within us. And so to give that time and space of recalibration to your nervous system and to that essentially our biologically wired stress response, it can be so healing to be able to kind of lean into some of the simple things in life that we kind of forget to do at times, just because we're so distracted and so busy and all our to-do lists and all the things. It's almost like we've some of us have lost touch with some of just that like pure humanness of like what human life it can feel like and be like when we're just a little bit more slow and mindful and aware. And obviously, yes, when it comes to like pressures and making money and surviving and all of those things, those are very real, especially in our world today for various reasons. And it can be hard, right? And sometimes we have to, I was talking to my husband about this, we've been talking about it forever, but this idea of like choice of like where we want to live when it comes to like, do we want to subscribe to the same kind of busy life or do we want to choose something different, right? And some people, that's a privilege to be able to choose to live somewhere different and whatnot. So, but the ones that are able to do that, it might be something worth considering.
Yeah, I've noticed since, because my work's been, this is something I do need to address come the new year. I've just taken on more than I can handle, really. And my eye has started to twitch because of looking in screens too much. I found myself like naturally, when I go for a walk, because I always make sure, even if it's the shortest walk ever, I just make sure I go outside and get some like fresh air and vitamin D or whatever, or just to like clear my head even at night. Like I'll do it later today before I go to bed. I've stopped listening to music or podcasts. I just listen to nothing. And it's just like my brain is just going, stop.
Yeah. Exactly. And those little things, right? Like, that helps you and probably really helps your nervous system. And that's why I think going all the way back to this idea of like January, new resolutions and all this stuff, like it could be that small to where you just do more of that, right? Like maybe you don't add anything new. You just do more of what actually feels good to you and to your system, I think can be more than enough. So it can be like just small things.
Yeah. Can we talk a little bit about, you've got something called the Nourished Wellness Group, and I just love the name of that. And so is that more about encouraging like community as well? Because this is in a world that's, becoming more and more isolated. It's an antidote, isn't it, as well, I think?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, so it's actually Nourished Wellness Group is a group mental health practice. So it's a group full of clinicians, including myself, that all are very passionate about an integrative mind body approach. So sometimes traditional talk therapy is very kind of cognitive, very from, neck up, where we really want to incorporate the physical body in these different kinds of ways through, walk talk or yoga therapy or EMDR or somatic therapy. So all of us are trained in different modalities and offer different ways of healing. But the group part of it, obviously, is all the clinicians together. But we also are big believers in, outside holistic providers, right? Because we can only kind of get at the breadth and depth of a person's experience. So say someone coming in with anxiety, right, we can only kind of get at the breadth and depth. And historically, therapists don't, touch their clients and things like that. So we want to bring in some of our community partners like acupuncturists and energy healers and naturopaths to help support their healing and kind of sort of really get their treatment plan a little bit more detailed. So it's more holistic. It's really kind of looking at all angles and sides of whatever it is that they're struggling with and help support and guide them along the way. So Nourished Wellness Group is mainly a group practice where, people come and they're working on mental health related struggles. And then they also, part of our group, they have access to what we call Studio Nourished. And it's a digital platform that they can use in between sessions that offers different downloads, different guided practices, different things to kind of enhance and build momentum into what they're doing. Because when it comes to healing, it's a process.
Yeah.
It's an absolute process. It's often decades of unwinding and kind of reprogramming both the nervous system and belief systems and patterns and all the things. So it's one of those things where the more you engage and integrate it into your daily life, the more that healing momentum builds and grows. So we really kind of believe, again, in kind of having support outside of us, but then also having that in between session work as well to kind of continue to help foster whatever it is we're trying to work on. Yeah.
I absolutely love that. And you mentioned like acupuncturists, and I think like if you go to somebody who's a great masseuse, like they can unlock energy that you can just be, stored, the neck and the shoulders, especially, all that tension. And it's like, I do feel like that side of healing does get overlooked by a lot of professionals like yourself and in your industry where you've done all the training. And it's, again, I'm going to be careful, but like for me, with counselors, there's some great ones and then there's some not good ones. Because like you said, talk therapy, I think it can get you to a certain place if you like match with somebody. But like to really get into the deep stuff, I think the body is such an important, often overlooked.
Oh gosh. Yes. And I love that you brought up massage, because that's such a perfect example of, the body work that often needs to be done to kind of clear out, right, the different energy channels or clear out the muscles. Because if we think about it, as we move through the world, our whole body is responding to it as well, right? The nervous system is responding to it. And then our posture and the way our tone of voice or whatever it may be is all reflection of that. So a lot of the work that we're doing is we're paying attention to that as therapists. We're paying attention to how the person's sitting and when they're talking about something, like how their body is in a defense posture and being aware of that and kind of working through it. But they definitely need some of those outside providers to help, really kind of work it through, because it's we can't necessarily get at that in the way. All important.
Yeah, for sure. Well, this has been great. I could chat to you more, but I'm not going to, because I'm very mindful of your time and our listeners. But I can't let you go until we do the Happy Life Project's last 5 in 5. So these are the same 5 questions that I ask every guest to conclude the episode. They're very quick fire. Are you ready? Okay. When and where are you at your happiest?
On my couch. Alone in my house on the couch. I have a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old, so I don't get a lot of quiet time. So when I'm sitting on my couch alone with no sound and just looking out my beautiful window, right now, that's when I'm happy.
Nice. What's your favorite thing to do that nourishes your mental health?
I would say being in nature.
What piece of advice do you now know that you wished somebody would have told you earlier that would have made you a happier person?
That control is an illusion.
What is the most important one thing that needs to change to make the world a happier place?
more kindness, more love, and more kindness and more compassion for humans that are not like us.
Nice. And finally, what's one small intentional change that listeners can make today to start the year off on a healthier, more balanced note?
Pay attention to your breath. Actually breathe. Breathe in deeply, breathe out deeply, paying attention to that breath pattern and rhythm, all connected again to your nervous system, and can be pretty game changing when you kind of allow a little bit more oxygen in.
I love it. So for more on you, the website is drkellyvincent.com. And for people to check out your Instagram page, it's dr.kellyvincent. And we'll add all that to the episode show notes as well. Is there anywhere else you want me to point listeners to?
Yeah, the other website would be my group practice. So nourishedwellnessgroup.com.
Perfect.
And obviously we can only see people within the state of California, within the US. But still, there's a bunch of resources on our website, and some guided practices even for anyone to use. And our blog has a lot of, more information around the nervous system and all those kinds of things. So it could be a helpful resource in general.
Thank you, Kelly. Great talking to you today. Happy New Year.
Thank you. Have a good rest of your day.
Hello, Gabby here. I'm back. Thank you again to the fantastic Dr. Kelly. And thank you to you, my friend, for listening to this very episode of the Happier Life Project podcast. As always, I do have to run through the important housekeeping, so please stick with us if you can, just for another minute of your precious time. If you are suffering with your mental health, there is a crisis button on the My Possible Self app, which will signpost you to the correct information for immediate expert advice. Those of you who are listening on one of the podcast platforms, the My Possible Self app is completely free to download, so you don't need to worry about it costing you anything. If you are in crisis or you think you may have an emergency, please do call your doctor or the emergency services immediately. The views expressed in this podcast are solely those of the interviewer, which is me, and the interviewees. The content of this podcast is for informational and educational purposes only and should not be considered as a substitute for professional or medical advice. Our partners at the Priory Healthcare are not involved in the production or content of this podcast. If you found this episode helpful, please do share it with your friends, your loved ones. And if you're listening on one of the podcast platforms, it would mean a lot for you to subscribe to the pod and to leave us a review if you haven't done already. And to find and follow us on social media. If you're not already there, we are most active on Instagram, and you can find us at My Possible Self. And I've been at Radio Gabby. Do take care, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye for now.